Welcome, everybody, to the Culture of Life podcast. I am here when this is a production of First Fisherman Media in association, our new association with the Malvern Retreat House. We're here, is it called Cambry Hall?
Cambry Hall.
Cambry Hall. I didn't know that. We're at Cambry Hall where Malvern Retreat Center is setting up a sort of multimedia podcast video studio in collaboration with us, which is an incredible blessing. And I'm here with a gentleman who works at the Malvern Retreat House by the name of Peter Land. And we're going to hear a little bit about his story. He's got a very interesting story, and we're going to hear about it. We're going to talk about modern pilgrimage. And because Peter, as I understood it, and Peter can correct me if I'm wrong, but you walked around the United States leaving home with either under $10 in your pocket?
I think it was $10.
$10. So
Yeah.
he left his home in Philadelphia and walked around the United States with
In cash
with the backpack full of a backpack full. What did your backpack have?
So in the beginning, I started out with a tent, a sleeping bag. I was expecting to camp out actually all along the way across America. And I found out pretty quickly on that as I was stopping in towns, introducing myself to churches and people, I was being welcomed into homes and given
Amazing.
Places. My favorite was just a couch. If somebody would give me a couch, and all the extra weight from the backpack, from the tent and the sleeping bag and everything else that goes along with that, I realized it wasn't necessary, and it was more of a burden to keep carrying all this. But I really felt in my heart to let go of it. Like I heard God say, like, I'll provide places for you. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but I found that without having my own sleeping accommodations or quarters with a tent, it forced me to engage, encounter, and connect with people because I didn't have my own needs.
Right.
It's actually a point of great reflection for life on the road, pilgrimage, but also our whole society.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It reminds me of the Amish, who they had this idea about insurance. But they don't believe in insurance because if your barn burns down, the community is supposed to get together and raise you a new barn.
They are each other's insurance.
Right, exactly. Like their community, your relationships are your insurance.
Beautiful.
Actually, right? Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
So they don't abstract it to this third-party company that's anonymous.
Exactly.
And it's like abstracted and inhuman in a way.
Everything becomes individualized too.
Exactly.
And you're disconnected by that means from other people and having, dependence or interrelationship.
Yeah. And they also, it's very interesting. I heard the same rationale for the reason why I believe they're allowed to have phones at work for work, but they're not allowed to have phones at home because if they have a phone, they won't go to their neighbor and just be with them.
That's so
interesting. Just go sit on the porch and have a lemonade and hang out.
Exactly.
Because they'll just
There's
call
no need.
them up.
Yeah, if you don't have a phone, you're actually going to go and talk to somebody face to face.
Right, exactly. You have to, or else you're just going to sit at home.
Or just sit by yourself.
Right.
It's almost like the phone, like instead of actually connecting us, it's like ironically done the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is so fascinating because I also had my own version of the pilgrimage, nowhere near as austere as yours. But I was traveling around the world for about 13 years, and so I can relate. And I wasn't doing it. I was a nomad. Mm-hmm. I turned into a pilgrim. So from a nomad to a pilgrim, and the churches of Europe is what started my conversion, right? But
wow.
But yours is started out. You were doing this. So I'm curious. Let me not put words in your mouth. So why would you decide? How old were you when you started this?
That's a great question. 2015. So about almost 30 years old.
You were 30 years old.
Yeah,
okay.
about 30.
So you were 30 years old. What led up to the reason why you would do this? Because it's a pretty radical life decision.
It is, yeah. And it was something that was on my mind for a couple years. So it's almost like a thought. And I had actually attempted it a couple years previously, like a small pilgrimage where I made it from Washington, D.C. to Steubenville, Ohio.
Wow,
Yeah,
right,
there's
right.
actually a canal path. It's called the C&O Canal Path. A lot of people bike it, but you can take that almost all the way to Steubenville.
Oh my gosh, how long did that take you to walk?
That took me about a few weeks.
Wow.
It's not as long as you would think.
And you're camping along the way, or you were
No,
also
I was
finding
places to stay. Yeah,
so
it was
this
incredible.
is the mini version.
This was a mini version, and it was like almost like an attempt. Because I've been discerning religious life ever since I graduated college.
And you went to Franciscan?
No, I went to Boston College.
Oh, okay.
But my conversion really began at Boston College. And I was drawn to a contemplative life, but more and more, I joined the Carmelites, the Discalced Carmelites, for about a year and a half, and then left. But what kept speaking to me after I left was this life that incorporated prayer, pilgrimage, and mission.
Interesting.
And so kind of like
your own mendicant order.
Mendicant, exactly. And so I was drawn to St. Francis and how his radical imitation of the gospel. I really just drawn to the gospel life of Christ. Like that was what inflames my heart. And I was like, this is what I want to follow. And I remember reading about St. Francis and how he literally, that's what inspired his whole life, was the gospel life of Christ. And so I kept thinking, well, how does one in modern day America live a life like Jesus and St. Francis, who followed in his footsteps? And I remember coming across an article, just very providentially, of this man named Pilgrim George. And I think he's deceased now, but from Pittsburgh, and he discerned a vocation to the priesthood. But during his seminary formation, he decided to leave, and he went on a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, which is the famous site in Spain. But during his pilgrimage, he felt this call to remain a pilgrim for the rest of his life. And so
he went for like a week, and he's like, I'm just doing this for the rest of my life.
Exactly. Yeah, he went from across Spain to Santiago, and then from there he went to Jerusalem. So he just continued walking across Europe. And then when he got back to the United States, he found his life alternated between what he called pustynia. Pustynia is a Russian word for desert, which refers to being in a hermitage. So he lived in a hermitage for like 6 or 7 months of the year, and then the other months he walked. And he brought a tent with him, and he camped wherever he could find. But I just read this whole story about his life, and I was like, wow, this guy, he just walks across America and bears witness in a very visible way to faith and life and the love of Jesus. And when I read that, I was like, wow, this is like, it kind of inspired me to just give it a shot, because as I was discerning, so many things came up, but one was that it's so comfortable in America, and we have all our needs constantly met. What room does that provide for in terms of living a life of radical faith? Like if I have the money I need and sleeping quarters and food and everything pretty much at my fingertips, what room? I mean, I know God still breaks into that, but I felt the need to really trust him more radically and like surrender my daily sustenance, my daily life, not only to the Lord, but then also to be out and witnessing and connecting with other people on the road and sharing my faith in a more of a missionary way. So it was almost like twofold. One, I felt this like need to utterly rely on the Lord. But then secondly, I really felt this call to mission and just to go out into the world and bear witness. So when I traveled across the United States, it wasn't a pilgrimage in the traditional sense, in that I was set on a destination. When you walk in Europe and you're going to Santiago, Santiago is a destination, and then your pilgrimage pretty much ends there and you go back home. But for me, across the America it was almost like an open-ended pilgrimage in which I was just stopping at places along the way. So I wouldn't say I was necessarily nomadic. I still saw myself as a pilgrim in going in a particular direction, but my direction was focused on connecting with the faithful people across America and sharing life in Christ and trusting in him and sharing the stories that came up along the way.
Amazing. Yeah, there's a difference between, I forget where I read this, but they said that the difference between a tourist and a traveler is that the tourist knows when they're coming home. Like there's a set amount of time for their trip. That's and a true traveler is just like, just going. I'm just traveling. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I'm not sure when I'm going to come home.
Yeah. It's almost like
I'll come home when it's time to come home, whatever that means.
Well, that's true. And I actually felt that in my heart after over 2 years on the road. I got the sense I was walking on the Appalachian Trail. So I was hiking, but I really got the sense it's time to go home. It's time to take this whole thing home and be rooted. because so much of what I was discovering along the pilgrimage and I'd even thought about beforehand was this need for intentional community, rootedness in a particular place, a sustainable life, relationships with people. So these were things I was talking about to people as I was traveling across the country.
You're like, I don't have that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did have it previously, and I still had relationships and connections back home, but I felt called to almost like bring a lot of the insights back home and really work on building something, a foundation.
Yeah. What did your parents say when you said, Mom, Dad, guess what? I've got this great idea. I'm going to go walk around America with $10 in my pocket.
It was actually, I had no money. And I told my dad first because I thought he could receive it a little better. And he was the first one to give me $10. And I never went less than those $10. I always had at least $10 in my pocket.
So you were going to go with zero.
Yeah. I went with I started with nothing, although I had money in my bank account so that when I returned, I would have some money.
But your plan was not to use that money.
My plan was not to use that. Yeah, it was really to go kind of trusting in the Lord for my needs.
How did that $10 affect you? Did it change your mindset?
I kind of saw it as a little gift, like almost like a little sign from God that he was going to take care and not to worry. And it was
your first sign from the Lord.
Yeah.
That, it's okay.
And not that I was even like seeking money, because St. Francis wouldn't even touch money or accept it. But it was needed at times.
Interesting.
It was.
So you're discerning a religious vocation. How did you went to one order and you just felt that it just wasn't a fit for you? They didn't exactly have what you were looking for.
Right.
They had certain pieces. And did you think about trying to find another order, or you're just like, okay, look, obviously the religious orders of today that I know about don't have this radical 3-part life, triumvirate life that I'm looking for.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
I just don't know of one.
I was at first really drawn
because even the mendicant orders aren't mendicant anymore. It's like the Dominicans, for example, like they were a mendicant order, I think, in the beginning, and now they're
exactly. Yeah, they were mendicant. They were itinerant. They were missionary on the road. All the mendicant orders, Carmelites are included, Franciscans, Dominicans. They all have, at least in my mind, they've kind of. I don't know. I don't want to say compromise, but they're living a life that no longer reflects the original charism. I know the charism of a community evolves over time, but when I was discerning and when I kind of rediscovered the Lord, I was drawn to like these original charisms, like how radical they were and beautiful, like really inspiring. And the Carmelite order, they lived as hermits, but the prophet Elijah is really considered the founder of the Carmelites, which is awesome.
Know that.
Yeah, he's considered the founder. All the founders have statues of all the religious orders have statues of their founders in Rome. So St. Benedict, St. Francis, the prophet Elijah is the statue for the Carmelites. Yeah, it's actually an amazing story. And he lived a life of contemplation in the desert, but also bearing witness to the truth of God amidst the false prophets of Israel. So there was this element of mission and contemplation. But when I entered the order, I wasn't that excited about what I was joining. But
what were they doing? What was the daily sort of life of their order?
The daily life was, we had the orarium, which was a routine of prayer, morning prayer.
There are like radical orders, like the Carthusians, like the Trappists, and these guys waking up at 3 a.m. and
I've spent time visiting so many different religious communities, and I guess I had this particular vision and mix that doesn't seem to come together in any community that I found.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, by the way.
No, that's okay. So what I found in the Carmelites was, as much as I loved the community, and they did do missions, they preached missions, they led a lot of retreats, their focus was on the spirituality of Carmel, and particularly St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, and St. Therese the Little Flower. So beautiful, beautiful order and spirituality. And that was the kind of work I was drawn to. But the community life I left a lot to be wanting for me.
In what way?
Well, it just seemed a little bit more like a gentleman's club, to be honest.
Just dudes hanging out.
Kind of guys hanging out, doing what they wanted. But they also, it didn't seem to reflect the poverty that they vowed, that we were called to as a community. I mean, there was almost like anything you needed was available.
Right.
Even though you lived in a monastery,
They had a chef.
Yeah. They had like multiple cars. Anybody could go out at any point.
Too many people had left them their will.
They did. You would get a lot of support.
Happens, right?
It's true. It's almost like there's the danger of this connection of being really involved in the world, because then you get all this support. And people were constantly dropping off food, and it's like unhealthy stuff. You almost have to you have to preserve an austerity of life.
Right.
And I wasn't.
So there's like a vow of poverty and then a vow of poverty. There's like levels to that. Poverty.
Yeah, like even in the Franciscan order, in the early development, they had a lot of debate and challenges of what it means to live poverty. And there was this idea that came to the fore among the radicals that poverty actually included like intentionally choosing, only allowing yourself to choose what like a really poor person could actually have.
So it's like almost like Mother Teresa's order. They really lived this poverty, right? The missionaries of charity, where they're like, I saw them. I have a business in Skopje in Macedonia where she was born and was raised, and you see their order, and they're very austere. Like they live. They don't get anything. A
lot of young men and women.
They live in a dorm, like they get no food. I mean, they order very little, and like they're.
I don't know what it's like with the missionaries of charity, but I do know that men who are discerning religious life, and in particular monastic life, are drawn to the really austere communities.
Right.
Where you have very little. You know, just a bed in your room, maybe a desk. You live a life of work and prayer, but it's like when you strip away all those things, it's almost as if the grace of God becomes more tangible, like, and we become more present to God. In the mortification, things are stripped away so that your life of prayer becomes more on fire.
So interesting. When I was in college, I did a semester abroad in Spain, and I was really into playing music. And it was this big, I come from this Jewish family, which is like, they're very focused on success in the world, like material success, educational success. And then I got this love of music, which was, if I go down this road, I'm definitely not going to get that. Yeah. So I was like, really, it was freaking me out. And so I said, okay, what I'm going to do is see how important music is to me. So I decided to go live on the street. I could just go take my guitar and only make what I could make playing on the street. And I did that in Sevilla. This is in 1993. And we'd live in squats and play music during the day. And it was really interesting. I had a similar idea. It's like, I need to get radical about this. Radical means to the root. I need to get to the root of the question, which is, how important is money to me? And how important is this art to me? Like what, it wasn't God, it was art at that time. And I just wanted to see that. And I said, there's no other way for me to experiment with that than do a really radical experiment where my art is providing every single dollar that I make during the day. I have to live from what I make. So art, and so it's a very similar.
A completely similar, actually, pattern of thought in terms of like the pilgrimage and the life of faith.
Right.
Wanting to be all in.
Yeah.
And if I had these other things I was drawing on, and that's how I felt in religious life, it just seemed a little too comfortable.
Right. You're thinking you're entering some radical thing, and you're there with your brothers, like watching cable and eating nice food.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden you start getting soft, and your prayer life gets weaker, and the fervor that brought you to this place in the first place begins to, go cold almost.
Right. To me, when I went, I went up to visit, I won't mention the order, but I went to visit an order recently. And I had a very similar experience where it's like, it was really nice. It was like, they seemed like really nice guys, and it was very interesting. But I went to two. I went to a Trappist monastery, and when I walked in there was this level of seriousness at that place. Where they were sacrificing more, maybe not to the same extent. They're living in a place. They have a business. That business brings in money. Yeah. They sell jams or whatever. But their daily schedule was hardcore. Like
3 o'clock in the morning, right?
They're getting up at 3 a.m. and you could the minute you're there, you could feel the intensity of this. And it was interesting. And so I'm curious, like. So you go to this one, and you decided, okay, if this is the order that I go to, and I don't feel that they're doing exactly what it is that I want to do, you decided not to go try to find other orders. You said, I'm just going to go and not make my own order. I'm just going to go follow the Lord in the way that.
Well, it took a few years to really get to that point, because I really did discern religious life after that with the Jesuits, with the Franciscans. with a number of communities, Community of St. John. I visited a few monasteries, but I never felt the call to a monastic vocation. That's a very particular call. If you feel the call to mission, the monastic life is...
It's more contemplative.
It's more contemplative, exactly. So I lived and worked after I left the Carmelites. And by the way, me leaving the Carmelites wasn't my own decision. It wasn't purely my own decision.
Really? They said, hey, this is not for you.
Exactly. My novice master said, I don't think this seems to be the best fit for what you're looking for. And it was almost a relief.
Because you're like living outside.
Well, no, I wasn't camping outside the monastery, but I was committed to the cell.
Right.
The cell is the room in which you are assigned and live in. And the rule of St. Albert, which is the rule of the Carmelite order, one of the first lines is every monk or friar should sit in his cell meditating on the law of the Lord day and night unless attending to some other duty.
So you took that seriously.
I took that as literally as I could. And they were like, dude, what are you doing? You're like, come out of the room.
Come on, we're watching cable.
Out.
We're watching
I know,
eating pizza. We're hanging out.
I would go to recreation because that was required, but only because it was required, to be honest. I wasn't excited. It was kind of painful.
How long were you there?
I was there for a year and a half.
Okay.
But it was really fruitful time, and I really got to pour into Scripture. And joining the community for the Liturgy of the Hours, rooting me in the Psalms, in the hymns of the church.
Yeah,
I just fell in love with the liturgy of the church and really the whole history of Carmel. I studied a lot of the saints, and some of the friars were wonderful guys. Teaching me, mentoring me.
Right.
So it wasn't a bad experience. It was really blessed. I actually felt God call me to be there for that time, and then this was a sign that I wasn't meant to stay.
Just like
so when I left,
warm-up,
I was like,
appetizer.
Yeah, almost like God is teaching us as we're growing into what He's calling us to be.
Amen.
And this was the beginning. This was at least a step along the way. So when I left, I contacted the Jesuits. The Jesuits.
Why the Jesuits? Because they're like a very what's their? Obviously they were. I think if I'm not wrong, they were created to combat Protestantism, the rise of Protestantism, right? That was their charism initially, was to evangelize the Protestants back to the church. Is that right?
Well, I think I went to Jesuit schools, high school and a college. Okay. And from what I found was that St. Ignatius, the original intent was to evangelize the Holy Land.
Okay.
So it wasn't on mission to the Holy Land, but the Pope redirected all their efforts to the Europe, basically.
Got it.
Yeah, the Christian people of that time. So anyhow, they developed in a lot of different ways. But one thing I appreciate about the Jesuits is that there's this sense of mission that allows individuals to kind of like find their niche within the community.
Such a big community too. It's like, how many are there? There's like 30,000.
I think now there's like 10,000.
Okay,
but there used to be, yeah. But there's I think freedom in the Jesuit order. Like they live in community, but it's loose. It's always at the service of mission. So I was drawn to that idea of mission, and being a part of a community. And they consider themselves contemplatives in action. Although that's debatable how much that's actually true. Yeah. But it wasn't meant to be. And the vocation director, so I didn't take that too far, and I continued discerning across the country. And I think I visited almost every community I could find, and nothing really spoke to this particular life except for how
this is before your trip. This is entirely before. You're not walking around to these communities. You're flying there and seeing.
Well, yeah, here and there. Yeah, driving. I had a car at one point. And then I had to live, actually. Well, I had to live in the world as a layperson paying off my college loans.
Sure.
So that took about 2 years. And during that time, I kept discerning, well, what about like just a lay consecrated life and finding other young men who want to live in community? And what was hard was finding other young men who were interested in such a radical life. Most men who were discerning joining a community somewhere. So I came back to Philadelphia, and I just, I kind of settled into a life and continued visiting places here and there. But the life of almost like a hermit, an itinerant pilgrim, and a missionary I couldn't find that combined anywhere. And so I kind of just left that in the hands of the Lord. And what continued to surface in my heart was to try to live this, to follow the lights that God was giving me at the time. And one of those lights was, you can walk as a pilgrim in this country, relying on me and bearing witness to your faith.
So this came to you.
This started coming, yeah. It started kind of like
you can
brewing.
do this, like this idea that you have, like why not?
Yeah, and I really didn't think. I thought it was so crazy, and I was like, Lord, I can't do that. You know, that's kind of what
That's really radical.
Yeah. I was like, this is radical, but like, you know, right. I mean, like, and how long and where will I go and where will I stay and all those questions. And I remember asking the Lord for a sign, and I just opened up the scriptures and it landed on that
lilies of the field,
final passage of the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus says, go forth, you know, and baptize all peoples, all nations in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Like, I've sent you forth as missionaries. And I saw that as like an unmistakable sign. And I just got so many signs along the way that God was actually calling me to this. And it continued just to come up, like in my prayer. Like, I couldn't avoid it. I think that's a really good sign of a vocation to something, is when you kind of dismiss it, but it keeps coming back.
Right.
But it was also like my deepest desire. Like, it wasn't it was something I really wanted to do. I was like, I feel like I'm made for this. But at the same time, my flesh, my weakness is afraid of it.
Right.
And
what will happen to me?
Yeah, I would come up with all these reasons to dismiss it. But deep down, I was like, I know I can do this, and it seems that God's calling me to. And again, it was experimental, but it was part of it's been part of a longer journey of discernment of this type of life. Yeah.
So interesting. So at some point you're looking for a religious community that you can live in. You're not really finding one. And this prayer that you're praying to the Lord to ask him what you should do, and you have this idea, and he keeps reinforcing it. It keeps coming back up. And so one day you just decide to do it, and you just say, okay, Dad, I'm going to do this.
I was preparing for a little while, but it was basically like, okay, I'm going to plan for leaving.
So what was the first day like?
The first day was crazy. Oh my gosh.
Like, okay, it's Tuesday, it's 8 a.m. and here we are. I'm walking. And where am I going?
I left from York, Pennsylvania.
Where were you going?
Yeah. I just knew that. So what I would do is kind of like plan out an itinerary of like 60 to 100 miles at a time, like knowing I wanted to stop at this particular place that was going in a direction. Usually they were like bigger towns that had a university where I thought I could connect with a campus ministry, or there would be like some shrine. So there was always like this like intermediate endpoint that I was interested in stopping at. Right. So I just find little towns along the way. And my first day I walked maybe 12 or 15 miles, and I showed up at night in this small little town. And it just so happened that there was this little gathering of women, like having a little Bible study. I knocked on the door and I told them, hey, I'm just a pilgrim. I'm passing through. Do you mind if I camp out for the night? And they I forget what happened, but they definitely let me come in. They said hello. They were like interested in hearing my story, and they said, yeah, it's fine. And I think they gave me some food, and they really kind of took care of me for the night. So I camped out there for the first night. In 3 days, I made it to Gettysburg. And at Gettysburg, I stayed for a couple of days in a church in like a room that they gave me. And I was connecting with the campus ministry there. I was connecting with the local parish. And everywhere I went, my intention was to get involved in the life of the community, not to say, hey, I have something to say. You know, I'm here to preach.
So it wasn't a preaching mission?
No, it wasn't. But when opportunities came up, if people invited me to share, then I would. And often opportunities came up, even if it was just a small group. But I generally came and I wanted to be a part of what was already living. And I kind of felt like that was the call of the gospel for me at that time, was to support, to love, to join hands, to be a part of God's work wherever it was.
Amen.
And to, try to be Jesus as best I could.
Wow. And so day one goes pretty well, and then you're saying, okay, this is wonderful. But you had some other vision of where you wanted to go? Like, where you would just discern, okay, I'm in Gettysburg tonight. Now what? And you just would come up with a new idea. It's like, okay, now I want to go.
Well, I knew I wanted to go like south and down to Florida and then west across the. I don't know why, but that's just what I figured. It's better to be in the south during the winter time, than anywhere else. So that's what I was thinking. I would go south and west and across the country. It unfolded in time. Like, I didn't really have it mapped out, but it just seemed like a path emerged. I walked on these small rural county roads, and it wasn't safe generally. Right. You had to be really careful with the cars at times, but I had some beautiful walks, and it's like it just kind of unfolded as I went. Yeah. I mean, it really was. It was each day was an adventure. I never knew where I was going to stay, but when I showed up, I knocked on doors. Not usually houses, but on church doors. And I usually found somebody, even if it was just like a group that was gathering there at night, and then they let me like join in. You know, I remember joining in on this Pentecostal church.
So you weren't stopping necessarily only at Catholic churches.
I would go to Catholic church first, and then if I was rejected or found no one there, then I would go to whatever next church I could find.
Wow.
And I remember being at a Pentecostal church, and the whole gathering, it was like a Wednesday night gathering. Wednesday nights are good nights in the Protestant world because they're always doing like a Bible study. But the whole community prayed over me. It was really cool, in tongues and all various, you know, like people just praying in all sorts of ways. And it was really beautiful, actually. And I remember showing up at a church in a town where as I walked in, they were praying. They didn't know I walked in. And the pastor or the leader was praying that somebody would come in who they could take care of to their church. And I don't think he was praying that literally, but like just like saying like, Lord, like send us people who we can take care of, you know, like we need to be your hands and your feet in this world. Like it was incredible. I walked in during that prayer and they looked at me and they said like, who are you? Like, where are you coming from? I said, I'm just a pilgrim, you know, I'm wondering if I might be able to stay here for the night. And they were just like baffled, you know, because it was as if God answered their prayer as they were praying it. Amazing. By me just walking in.
That's incredible.
And there were multiple stories like that.
Yeah. What's the hardest thing or the most difficult thing either about the trip in general or about a particular experience during?
Well, there was a particular experience that was it was meaningful. It was difficult, but it became very fruitful for me. Was that my first day walking into North Carolina, and I was having a great day walking. It was a beautiful day, meeting people along the way, and I was a few miles away from a church where I knew the pastor, and not directly, but indirectly. So I had a pretty good sense that this would be a good stop. But a few miles out, as I'm walking, a dog, like a pit bull, comes flying out of the woods. I mean, literally. And I'm walking in like suburban neighborhood, but it bolted out from its property right onto the road. And it caught me off guard. I was a little worried. I've had dogs. Dogs were a major issue the whole way. But this dog, usually they would stop at a distance. This dog came up right behind me, and I thought, well, maybe it would just stay a distance behind me and I just keep walking. Well, the next thing I knew, it actually latched on to my leg with its jaw. Yeah, it got me pretty good. And this was a intense dog. And for whatever reason, it let go. I mean, a lot of people ask me, how did you get the dog off you? Because normally they kind of like lockjaw. And once they do, it's very hard to get them off unless you like smash a bottle over their head or something like that.
Which you didn't probably have in your hand.
I didn't have anything like that. I had like an umbrella maybe or something. But anyhow, this dog let go of my leg in a few seconds, but I was bleeding profusely, and I couldn't have walked to the church the rest of the way. Like I really was in a bad shape. It just so happened that as that happened, after the dog left, the next door neighbors pulled in at the same time. And they knew this dog from the neighbors had attacked other people in the past. So it wasn't unusual, unfortunately. But they gave me a ride to the parish. I was waiting outside the doors of the church. Not to the hospital. I just kind of wrapped my leg up. And what was really amazing is that when I met the priest coming to open the doors for church, he welcomed me and just gave me things, whatever I needed, but introduced me to the whole parish at Mass. And there was a doctor in the congregation, and he came up to me after Mass and said, I would really like to treat your wounds. And he, with his whole family, we drove 30 minutes to his doctor's office, and he like kind of like washed me. It was almost like the Good Samaritan story. Amazing. Where I was really wounded. He wanted to give me all sorts of antibiotics too, and but I refused that. But
why did you refuse the antibiotics?
Well, I'm just not at that time, and even now, for the most part, I'm very hesitant about drugs. Yeah, I just don't feel comfortable.
Not a Vax guy.
No, I don't feel comfortable with pills.
Interesting.
Vitamins are different, but medical pills, I kind of dropped off the whole biomedical system and began to embrace an idea of like the body's self-healing.
Interesting.
And faith.
Did this happen during your
No, that was more in college.
You already had that.
I already had that like philosophy of life.
Interesting. Just to take a little detour there, what is the reasoning? It's just sort of, you think that it's almost a reliance on medications would be almost like carrying that you're carrying your backpack, or not your backpack, your tent with you, in that instead you should be relying on the Lord.
Not exactly. I mean, maybe an element of that. But as I studied in college, I became aware of just the amazing chemistry and biology of the human body, and things that were not really being taught in mainline science,
Right.
and that most doctors, I guess, weren't subscribing to. But that what science was finding about the body is that it has this amazing ability to heal itself. And we know that just from getting cut. You know, the body starts to repair itself quickly.
Right. So if you just stay out of the way.
Yeah, stay out of the way. And I became aware of this scientist who lived at the time, a doctor or scientist who lived at the time of Louis Pasteur in France, who actually discovered a different way of looking at the body.
Called the terrain theory.
You know about it.
I do.
Antoine.
Yeah.
Bouchon.
Versus, it's the terrain theory versus the pathogen theory.
Exactly.
Disease, right?
Which
so
is like focus on bacteria.
Right.
It's focus on bacteria coming in from the outside that needs to be destroyed.
Exactly. Versus if your terrain is good, you'll be okay. So for example, like during COVID, why did certain populations get sick? Because their terrain was jacked up. So if you're old, sick, fat,
people whose immune systems are already compromised.
Right, exactly.
And in America, our collective immune system is so poor, primarily because our terrain is so bad because of the food we eat.
Exactly.
And the lifestyles we live.
Right, sure. Yeah. So I'm very, very familiar with that guy.
Yeah.
I have a similar it's a whole other top podcast on the medical stuff, because I have a very similar view to you in that. Interesting. I also think part of it has to do with a mistaken anthropology. We view the body as like a mechanism, like it's very mechanistic in the modern medical system, where it's like we take these parts and we break it down, and it's very scientific. It's not. Right. It doesn't look at the whole.
Yeah, the whole is greater than the sum of its
Exactly.
parts.
It doesn't really look at the root. It doesn't really do root cause analysis. It does sort of symptom chasing.
Yes, and never gets to the root of why what's causing the symptoms.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
It's like this. It's sort of like you're going to it's like easier to deal with it upstream.
Yeah, like the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. So it's a whole other conversation. Very interesting. So the hardest thing was this.
Well, that wasn't the hardest thing.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty hard thing.
It was a challenging moment. I was 2 weeks off. I couldn't walk. On crutches. A woman welcomed me into her home to where I could heal, but I was that bad that I couldn't walk for about 2 weeks. And but it gave me a great fear of dogs. Really, dogs are scary when they're your enemy. And
not
they
like
don't
little chihuahuas. Though.
No,
right.
But I had a little chihuahua came across me one time at the road, like on a major road. It was crazy. I mean, it was like, because dogs are fearless. I mean, they really are. They have no fear. And this chihuahua, I mean, it's really sad.
It doesn't know it's going to die.
Well, and that's what happened, actually. This little chihuahua came across the road and a car ran it over. And then the owner came out when being all mad at me. And I was like, it's your dog, you know? I felt really bad. But in the country, people don't really chain their dogs up. Like because they don't see pedestrians. So if they see a pedestrian, it's like, you're just an enemy.
Right. So
for the most part. But it was almost like, okay, I'm going to keep trusting you, Lord. Like I'm trusting that you're sovereign over this whole journey and over all of creation. And at one point I felt this inspiration when I came across a dog that seemed not too nice to start singing. And as I did, it was amazing.
What would you sing?
Just like Amazing Grace.
Yeah,
like beautiful hymns that I knew, like not well, but you know, I just began singing at the top of my lungs, and it was amazing. The dogs was like, some of them would just start running away, but they would always clear a path.
Amazing.
It was like this praise of God in the heart cleared away before dogs that were ferocious.
It's incredible. So, what would you say is, what is your impression of the faith and the faithful in the country after walking around for 2 years and meeting, I'm assuming, a lot of them?
Oh man, it was such a great journey.
Not millions, but you met a lot of people.
Well, I would say the experience was manifold in a lot of different ways. I mean, you would experience, your normal Catholic parish where people would be like, who are you? What are you doing? And sometimes they would be inspired and excited about you and would want to welcome you into their house or into their community. But where I found the most inspiration, the most life, and the most encouragement was in small little communities that were gathering in each other's homes, where children were present, grandparents were present, almost like a self-led faith community, not disconnected from a larger church. I didn't find this so much in the Catholic world. I did here and there, But I found it more in the Protestant world, where they're almost like conducting their own faith services in their homes. But really, like, faith was at the center of what they were doing. And
interesting. Was that surprising to you?
No, it wasn't surprising. I knew about it, but it was beautiful to witness and be a part of and to like speak into. Because I do think God's calling us more and more to embrace this sense of like intentional community within the church.
Right, the Benedict option in a certain way.
Benedict
right,
option,
exactly,
yeah,
because
exactly.
You're like, they're coming for us, and so you might as well get into a group of other. We have to fortify ourselves in these intentional communities such that we have the strength to go out into a hostile culture and evangelize, or even just live.
Well, and I think
as
that's
believing
it.
Christians.
It's just like to live like an authentic Christian life and witness in the world requires a community. It's not really an optional thing. And I never saw it as like simply a defense mechanism against the hostility of the world, but there is that element.
Right.
But I think without community, it's going to be very hard to sustain a very vibrant faith.
Sure.
And seeing these groups of people come together in their homes, sharing scripture, just opening the word, praying over each other, teaching their children, and like sharing life, sharing their resources, eating meals together. Sharing meals with people was such a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
it's such a basic human part of human existence that we've gotten away from in America.
Right.
And I would
we
say
live like barbarians now. Just like eating
really
in front of the TV.
I know, it's so
like
sad.
Stuffing yourself in front of the TV. Like, that's
my
basically
gosh.
it.
So one of my more disheartening stays was staying with this man who was an obese man living by himself. I mean, he was visibly and vocally depressed. And at night he had the TV on and the radio. And I just felt a sense of depression in his little apartment. And he even talked to me about how he wanted to commit suicide. So I was staying in this house, little apartment.
How'd you meet him if he was just not?
He showed up at a church service.
Okay. A
small little Bible study at night. And he was the only one who offered a place for me to stay. So it says a lot.
Yeah. So you took it.
But I was like, okay, that's all. This is what God's offering me tonight. And I embraced it. And I really had the sense that God called me to be with him for the night. Right. But it was kind of like, wow, this is the result of American culture. Yeah.
Just put the mic a little closer to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's good close, but like
not too far away. Yeah. I got it.
That's really interesting. And so did you have certain vows that you were taking? I mean, obviously you're living out a poverty vow. That's pretty clear. Were there other vows or other sort of principles that you had when you were traveling that you started out with, or some that you picked up as you were going, or did some change? Or?
Yeah, definitely. That's great. Like it became something that evolved over time. It wasn't like I had like a whole blueprint for how I was going to live, but generally one of the principles was to not ask for money, but to ask for my basic needs.
Got it. Interesting.
Is there any food here I can eat? Is there a place where I can stay?
Right.
And
did you say that you're not asking for money, or did you make that clear to people, or you just didn't ask?
I just didn't ask.
Got it. So you didn't say, hey, I don't want your money. I just want.
Yeah, exactly. And if somebody said, well, I can't help you, but here's $20, then I would accept that. And I began questioning that because sometimes I was like, I had actually had a few extra dollars than I needed. So that became the relationship with money became somewhat challenging, actually, because Americans are very generous. But that's another thing about the journey. I found that people are very generous in our country when they open up to you.
Yeah.
And when they saw what I was doing, I mean, it's like I had so many supporters and people, again, welcoming me into their homes. But generally, I did try to live a life of poverty, chastity, obedience. I was very careful about my relationship with women.
Yeah, how did that go? Was that weird? Because you're like some ladies like, well, you can come back to my place.
I never really had like a woman
some weird propositions or something.
I actually had, to be honest, a really sad situation of a priest, actually.
Oh wow.
Yeah, welcoming me into a rectory, and I stayed in a number of rectories, but a particular priest who
propositioned you. Oh my God.
Well, yeah, basically.
Wow.
I mean, it was really awkward. I was almost ready to leave, and I just had to put up some really serious boundaries because he was like,
oh my gosh.
He didn't say anything explicit. It was just how he was acting.
Obvious.
Yeah, it was very obvious. It was very, and it was so uncomfortable. I was out of there.
He was like, I'd rather sleep on the street here.
Yeah.
Than get him. I mean,
it was
so many sins happening here.
I know. Yeah.
Just like well, we'll pray for him.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really hard.
And we ended up having a fruitful conversation at the end of the night.
Did you address the thing, or you just left?
I brought it
aside?
up. Yeah, I brought
Did
it up.
You really?
Yeah, but it was kind of in context with other things, other elements, other topics.
Wow. So, I'm also curious about this interaction between the Protestants and the Catholics. Meaning, not just like you're going both to Protestant communities and Catholic communities, and how did that affect your Catholicism versus, were you ever like, well, you know what, maybe I like these evangelicals, man, they're like real, like they're
living it. Yeah.
Like I thought I was, I went to the most extreme Catholic communities and they're soft. These people, they're talking in tongues, they're holding snakes, they're taking snake bites on their head.
Yeah.
Or was there none of that?
Yeah, it's a good, I don't know, a challenging time for me sometimes with the Catholic community, but I found a lot of beautiful things happening in Catholic communities as well. But for me, I never had any questions about the Catholic faith.
Right. So that
about the
wasn't
truth.
Ever,
it was
right.
never like,
get
maybe
sold to the Protestant.
Yeah, I was never like, okay, I'll leave the Catholic Church.
Right.
I really feel secure in my understanding, my belief that the Catholic Church is like, expresses the truth of God.
Amen.
And founded by Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And continues to perpetuate his mission. Amen. So it kind of like being disheartened, I guess, at times with maybe what I was not seeing in the Catholic Church, or the response that I got when I visited some churches which was maybe, here's the door.
Right.
Good luck.
Did you notice a difference? Did you go to any traditional Latin Mass versus not, or did you notice any difference there within the Catholic
I would
community?
say there weren't too many traditional Latin Mass communities that I came across, but unfortunately, I almost saw a correlation between like the more like conservative church or the conservative community in the Catholic Church, the more suspicious they were.
Interesting.
Yeah, the more suspicious they were. Yeah, and so I didn't always
because you're like
sense
some hippie,
a warm welcome.
around.
Yeah, kind of like, who are you? What are you doing? Like just a lot of questions and not a lot of openness.
Interesting.
Yeah, I actually found a lot more of a welcome in like liberal communities.
Interesting.
Even though
was that your disposition before? Because obviously it sounds like you're kind of strict with yourself in this way and like very conscientious about it. So that would kind of, someone would then just as a quick hit say, okay, well that sounds like more of a conservative person.
Yeah, and I would say I wouldn't fall into either camp. But I find like elements of both that are valuable and important to incorporate into like an authentic life of faith.
Got it.
But yeah, I wouldn't say I like associate with almost any particular community.
Got it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like so this Protestant thing. What's my question? I think what's interesting is this contrast between church life and the Protestant thing. What do you think that the Protestants have that the Catholics are either missing or have forgotten, or what is it? Is it like, what in terms of this community thing?
Yeah, I think one element is Pope Francis talks a little bit about the clericalism in the church. And I think an aspect of what that means is that the laity in the Catholic Church are overly dependent on the institution, the structures, but it's specifically the priest to kind of lead them in every way, almost like lead us by the hand. And I don't know how comfortable most Catholics are even like just praying openly with another person. Even in their own families, I don't know how many Catholics actually pray. So I think in the Protestant circles, it's almost like more like collectively led. Like they're
also, the pastor has a family. He's like a
exactly.
guy with a wife and 2 kids.
He's just like he's like a part of the community.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, he's looked up to, but he doesn't like replace the faith life that many of the Protestants are cultivating in their own homes that they're called to,
right?
That they feel called to.
Interesting.
Whereas I don't know how well I think that's starting to happen more and more by necessity in the Catholic world, which is beautiful. But there's still this sense of like, oh, the priest will do that. The priest will pray.
Right.
The priest will he'll celebrate the sacraments, he'll celebrate mass. And as a result, we almost feel uncomfortable doing anything else.
Right. It's interesting. I was discerning. I was baptized 2 years ago. And so before I joined the Catholic Church, I was discerning different Christian communities. I went to Quakers and Baptists and all this. And I noticed, I was curious as to, I found that the Catholics were in general the least welcoming in a certain way to a newcomer. I'm like, you go to a Quaker thing and everyone sits there. It's a little weird. It's quiet. You don't do anything. And then people stand up and talk. But then they have like a potluck after service.
Yeah.
And so you hang out and everybody eats and like you just chill.
Mm-hmm.
And I found, I was like, well, maybe it's because the Catholics come for a particular reason. I'm coming to go get the Eucharist. I'm here. It's like a transactional relationship. I come because I have to come on Sunday or every day or whatever, but I'm here for this particular thing.
Yeah.
Even though you're in a community, it's like I come for the Eucharist,
right.
I get the Eucharist, and then I go.
You're somewhat anonymous in the Catholic Church.
Exactly.
People don't even know if you're not there. You maybe be gone for 3 weeks. And
right.
No one
Whereas in the Protestants, they have to sell you on being in their particular denomination. So they're like, hey, what's up? How's it going? Peter, come on in. Like,
I know.
Come get a cup of coffee with me. We'll talk about Jesus. You know, like it's a little weird, but like they're very much more, again, I'm with you. I'm not making a pitch for evangelical. I'm just saying that
there's a lot we can learn though from
them. It's
them.
very interesting.
Yeah, they really create a warm atmosphere for the felt presence of Christ in relationship amongst themselves. Whereas in the Catholic Church, the emphasis is more vertically on your relationship with God, even though a parish, which is what St. John Paul II said, is supposed to be a community of communities. Right. And that's where I found a lot of life in the Catholic Church, apart from obviously the source and summit, which is the Eucharist.
Sure, of course.
I could never separate myself from the Eucharist. That's why the Catholic Church was always first for me. Right. And if I could spend some time in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, that was like number one.
Were you trying to go to daily mass?
I would always try to go to daily mass, however I could.
Wherever you could
and
get. Is that part of your trip?
That was part of like one of my principles. If I could go to daily mass, I would. If I could spend time in prayer a couple hours a day, I would. But in the Catholic Church, when you found a parish that was vibrant, they would have communities that were gathering regularly. They were part of the larger community, but they had their own niche community in which they knew each other and they were living life somewhat together.
Right, sure.
And that's where I found a lot of life and connecting with communities like that. And there's a lot of that in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, for sure. I'm impressed in the Philadelphia region. The serious Catholic community is pretty, like everyone goes to the same concerts. We go, like you sort of see the same people all around. So there is a community amongst the serious Catholics in the area. And I'm curious, did you notice any difference between, did you notice any difference between, let's say, suburban, urban versus rural communities? What was your experience there, if any differences that you noticed?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I didn't visit too many suburban parishes because it's very difficult to walk through suburban areas. It's
right, because everyone's looking at you like, this is weird.
Yeah, but it's just, suburbia is not designed for walking. Right. Apart from your neighborhood. Right, but that doesn't get you through suburbia. Yeah, I mean, even in Bluebell, which is where I'm from, you really can't walk through Bluebell. I mean, there's sidewalks here and there, but
you're on the street.
Everything's designed around the car. Now, when you get into a city, there are sidewalks, there's greenways. You can really, some cities are better than others.
Sure.
And so I kind of alternated between urban or little towns. Towns were also great to walk in because it's more compact.
Right.
I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah. In a rural community and in like a small town, the people had a better sense of knowing each other. There was a sense of like, this is our place. Whereas in a city, as you know, probably in Philadelphia, people come and go all the time. So it's almost like it's very difficult to have that sense of continuity in an urban parish. Generally, when I stopped in a city, I didn't find a lot of welcome, actually.
Interesting.
And I think part of that
was like some homeless dude.
Well, exactly.
Some drug addict.
Yeah.
There's
so many homeless people in the cities that you're really associated with. I was associated with the homeless.
Right.
Or somebody looking for something. I stopped in one church. It was really sad. It was a parish, and I stopped in the office, and the woman, I started talking to her. She got so scared. And she
shoot her or something.
She ran away. Yeah. And apparently she was attacked just a few days ago by somebody who walked into the rectory. And the pastor explained that to me. So he said, it's nothing personal. But almost by appearance, people would judge, understandably at times. But rural communities or small towns, they seem to be a little bit more secure in their identity or in their ability to just like welcome something that was outside the norm.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. I guess it's not that surprising, the urban thing, because there's such a community of homeless people now, and all these
young and old, right?
Young and old, and there's a lot of violence, and there's a lot of sort of social decay, and it's making people nervous. It's hard,
and the doors are locked to the churches.
Exactly, right.
It's kind of sad. It's like Jesus, Pope Francis says, like, we need to open the doors and let Jesus come out to the people. But I would, time and again, it was my greatest disappointment that during the day I would stop at a church and the doors were locked.
Yeah,
and I couldn't get in. I couldn't adore the Lord. I had a door from outside the front doors.
Right.
But it's like all these people in need, whether they're homeless or not, need Jesus, and the church is not open.
Yeah, it's really hard. I remember when I got baptized at the Basilica of St. Peter and Paul, which is right downtown. And they have this struggle, the same thing. It's like, okay, well, if you're homeless, you can do these certain things in the church, but you can't panhandle and bother people who are here praying, that kind of thing. But it's sort of like, well, but Jesus, what would Jesus say about this situation? It's kind of a really interesting kind of gray area. It's difficult to know, like, what prudentially to do in these times. It's like, what do you do? Are you going to let somebody have a mental breakdown in the middle of the church and start? Right?
Exactly. Like, or if you leave the doors open, the church becomes vandalized.
Exactly. It becomes vandalized, or it becomes like basically a homeless shelter. And should it be that? I don't. It's an interesting question. So did you have ever a period, like a dark night of the soul period, while you're on this journey, where you're like, all right, I thought it was going to be like this, and I'm tired, and I haven't eaten that well, and I'm just this is not a good idea?
Yeah, that goes back to your earlier question of like, what was one of maybe the more challenging times or parts of the whole experience. But it didn't take me too long to begin to question what I was doing. And wondering, like, why am I doing this? Like, it was like literally the first week, maybe the first day, I was like, Dad, this is, and not only, it wasn't so much like, this is crazy. It was more like,
you already knew that.
What's my purpose here? That became the primary question, because I was very much discerning a vocation that incorporated these elements of what I was doing, pilgrimage, mission, prayer. But the way I was actually living it out,
just trying to survive day to day.
It was kind of like trying to survive. And then when I did find a place, then doors would open up, but it would only be a couple days before I'd be on to the next place. So I was getting exhausted just with the constant travel. I mean, it was wearing me out. But B, the sense of like, okay, it's not like I'm coming with like a mission to places. It's more like I'm a pilgrim in need. And then, what can I do here?
Right. So if you were to do this again, would you revise your mission? If I said you had to do this, like, okay, Peter, I'm sending you out. Here's $10.
Yeah.
You're leaving Malvern where you work now. Yeah. You got to go. Like,
definitely.
So what would be your revision?
I would cultivate a sense of like, this is what I'm prepared to bring to a place.
Got it. You're like, I'm coming here and I'm going to go. I'm giving a talk.
Yeah.
I'm coming to town. My name's Peter Land. Here's my billboard. Or here's my, well, not my billboard, but here's my, like, I'm putting up a flyer at all the churches in town.
No, I wouldn't do that either. I wouldn't really try to advertise, because I don't think that's, it didn't seem to like that would ever, I mean, maybe that would work with people, but I don't feel the call to try to promote myself in any way. I do want to just follow in the footsteps of the Lord. But when you consider St. Francis and that early Franciscan movement, they showed up in places to preach the gospel.
Right. So I'm in the center square of
exactly.
town, and here I am.
And they would just preach openly, and they
like
would preach penance.
Street preachers.
Or if the pastor welcomed them or the bishop welcomed them, then they would be allowed into churches. But they didn't really let anything stop them. And they had a sense like, we're called to preach Jesus.
That's another
and the
level.
Mission.
That's next level.
It is. It's the next level.
Because you're not just saying, hey, I need. It's like, hey, I have something for you, this community too.
Yeah.
Here's my. I'm gonna stand here in the center square today.
Or just like, and it could even happen in similar ways, like knocking on doors, but like, hey, like, I'm a pilgrim, but I'm on a mission, like, sharing a little bit about my story. And then is there a place for me to speak,
So you got the chastity thing, you got the poverty thing, but the evangelical thing could have been improved upon.
Exactly.
In terms of you could have found a different way to prioritize that part of the mission.
Yeah, and that was something I was discovering along the way, because I didn't have a sense that like, oh, I'm this missionary traveling across the country. I wanted to kind of preach Jesus without preaching Jesus.
Right. It's interesting. When I first came in, I'm still very pretty zealous, because I'm like, love the Lord, and I like, it's the best thing that ever happened to me to join the church. And when I remember I was going to one of these orders downtown, and I was talking to him like, we could go out into Rittenhouse Square.
Yeah.
And we could we'll do Gregorian chant in Rittenhouse Square, and we'll bring it to the people, and it'll be on. And they're like, these guys are looking at me like,
I know,
like,
right?
You're crazy. I'm like, no, this is what Jesus would do.
I know.
Like, what are we doing in the church? Nobody's coming to the church.
I know.
There were 5 people in here this morning.
Bring the church out.
There's 400 people in Rittenhouse Square, and I'm smelling the weed. They all need help down there.
Definitely.
Like, there's people that are lost there.
The Neo-Catechumenal Way, they do that.
You know?
Have you heard of the Neo-Catechumenal Way? It's a lay community within the Catholic Church. They're very fervent and evangelical. They go out into the streets and they sing songs. They give witnesses.
Mission Youth or something.
Yeah, Mission Youth. So there are people doing that. Yeah.
I'm attracted to this. Because this is what this podcast series is about. We're taking
beautiful.
the message to the people where they are.
Yeah.
This is this digital center square in a certain way, because this is where people are. This is where Bishop Robert Barron's word came to me through this podcasting medium. So that's why I'm doing this. But it's that reason is that you can't just sit in church.
No.
The church is dying. They're like shrinking because fewer and fewer people are leaving Rittenhouse Square and going to the church, even though there's a beautiful St. Patrick's Church right off of Rittenhouse Square.
Right.
So we got to come out, and we got to get them to come somehow.
Yeah. And if our faith is vibrant and living, we can't be simply content with just going to church. Like, it should infiltrate and be a part of all that we do.
Evangelize.
And reprioritize our whole life.
Right.
Like, what am I called to do with my free time?
Yeah.
Or with my work, or whatever I'm doing. It should be in light of faith.
Amen.
And the response to the times.
Amen. Well, I've actually I've got to end in about 5 minutes. But I'd love to do a part 2. This is so fascinating.
Yeah, we're really just kind of scratching.
I know, we're just scratching the surface. We got to get deeper in this. So we'll do a whole series with Peter, because this is you're an amazing. It's like an amazing witness. I'm very inspired by your story. I think it's really interesting, because I like people. I'm very similar to you in the way that when I do something, I want to go all in. Like, I don't like half measures. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of cost to joining the church.
Oh my gosh.
I've got my mom, it really hurt her. Like, I broke up relationships with people. Like, there are real costs to doing this. So if I'm going to do it, I want to do it. I'm doing it for an earnest, serious reason. And I think it's the right thing, and it's true. And we should, and I understand, having come into the church, how this faith spread all over the world.
Yeah.
Because I know now why guys went into the jungles of, and it wasn't just, everyone's got this view today. It's like, it's just like colonialism. No, there were guys running into the jungle and knocking on doors saying, hey, your life has meaning.
Yeah. God
loves you.
Exactly.
He came down to save you from your sins.
Right.
You don't just have to be lost in this craziness, human sacrifice, whatever you're doing.
Right.
You don't have to do that.
Transforms everything.
Exactly.
The whole of humanity.
Right, exactly. It transforms the whole life. It's just this amazingly transformational message. And so to just sit there at church, and when it's like, it's like, it's as a new Catholic or newer
missed.
Catholic, it's like, what are we doing?
Yeah, because if you encounter the love of Christ, which is, I saw that across the country, especially young people, encountering directly the love of Christ, it compels you. As St. Paul says, it compels you. It drives you. It becomes a transformative experience where you simply can't just be content doing things as they've been done.
Totally.
100%. So that, for me, when I discovering God and His great love, like after years of searching for truth, I was like, there's nothing else I should do or even think of but serving God.
Amen.
Amen. It was like, there's nothing even that comes close.
No.
The God who made me, even just reflecting on being created, was like a game changer. I was like, wow, like
being created at this moment, not just one time a long time ago, but like right now, we're being created.
There's a creator, who created me, he's sustaining me in existence. Right, exactly. He holds me, he has eternal life prepared for me. I mean,
like, what else is there? It's the best game in town.
Oh my gosh. And there's nothing that compares with knowing Him and His love.
Exactly.
And everybody's searching for that.
Right, exactly. And so I'm like, and there's these priests and religion, they're formed for like years of study and all this. And I'm just like, you're wasting this amazing, not wasting, but like, there's so much more you could do with this amazing education that you have, and study and prayer and formation. Yeah. There's people in Rittenhouse Square, they need this message.
Exactly.
They need to hear it. The people in Kensington, they need it. The people in Bluebell,
the world
they
needs
need it. And they're just not coming to the church. We have to bring it out to them.
Yeah.
And I know that's weird. I know people are going to think you're funny and odd, and they're not going to like you. And right? That's like, but that's the cost. That's the cross we have to bear.
And
we
Jesus
can't just like, we'll just do it secretly in our little church, and this is it. It's like, no, this message is the salvation of the world.
Yeah,
it's not for the. It's great. It's also for the 5 people that are at church that day. That's great. I love them. They're amazing. I'm one of them. But there's like, what about the 97,000 that are walking around Philly totally lost and alone, like I was?
Right.
Why didn't you find me earlier?
Right.
You didn't come to me.
No.
Nobody got in my way.
Yeah.
You know, why not?
Exactly. And that's
did it in a way
the
that
heart of the shepherd, you know, to seek out the lost sheep.
Yeah. Amen.
So.
Well, thank you, Peter. It was amazing. I really appreciate you. And again, I hope you'll do a part 2, because we're going to hear the resolution of your journey. We'll keep people glued to their seats for episode 2 of the Peter Land story.
Ongoing journey.
How you came back to, how you chose Malvern, what your life is like here. How did you integrate your 2 years on the road, and what do you think about the future and all these things?
I'd be happy to. It'd be a great gift. I'm really grateful for all that you're doing here, Andrew. This is a beautiful initiative.
Yeah, hopefully the Lord will continue to bless it, because we tried to do the same thing at the Archdiocese, and we just got shut down. It's just it was just never happened. Like the Lord didn't want it to happen.
Yeah.
And then we came, and then all of a sudden here, Pete got involved, and it's starting to happen. And you guys here are super open.
Praise God.
Here, and this is amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.